Standing Committee on Public Accounts. Pursuant to Standing Order 1083G, the committee is meeting today to study the Public Accounts of Canada 2021. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Compte tenu de la directive
Given the Directive of Internal Economy of March 10th, all those participating in person must wear a mask except members of Parliament when they are at their seat during parliamentary deliberations. To guarantee the proper use of this meeting, I'd like to give the following directives to members and witnesses. Please await that I recognize you before speaking. Please press on the icon for the microphone to light your microphone.
You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. Those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed to the chair. Pour les députés présents dans la salle.
For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For those on Zoom, please use the raised hand function. The clerk and I will do our best to maintain speaking order, and we thank you for your patience and your understanding in this regard.
With our routine motion, I'm informing the committee that all witnesses have completed the required connection test in advance of the meeting. I'd now like to welcome our witnesses. Our list includes from the Office of the Auditor General, Karen Hogan, Auditor General of Canada, Etienne Matt, Principal, Chantal Perrault, Principal. From the Office of the Controller General of Canada, Roch Huppé, Controller General of Canada, Monia Lahaye, Assistant Controller General, Financial Management Sector, Diane Patacini, Executive Director, Government Accounting, Policy and Reporting. And of course, from the Department of Finance, Michael Sabia, Deputy Minister, Nicholas Leswick, Assistant Deputy Minister, Economic and Fiscal Policy Branch, Evelyn Dancy, Assistant Deputy Minister. Witnesses will have 5 minutes to make their opening statements. I understand we have statements from Ms. Hogan as well as Mr. Huppé. So I will call on Ms. Hogan to begin. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start by acknowledging that I am in Ottawa on the traditional unceded territory of Algonquin Anishinaabe people. As this is a virtual hearing and participants may be spread across different locations, I want to pay respect to Indigenous people from all nations across Canada. With me today are Chantal Perrault, Financial Audit Principal, and Etienne Matt, Financial Audit Principal, who are responsible for financial statement. We are pleased to have this opportunity to discuss our audit of the Government of Canada's consolidated financial statements for the 2020-2021 fiscal year. The government's financial statements are one of its key accountability documents. Our audit of these statements provides information that helps Parliament exercise its oversight of the government, promotes transparency, and encourages good financial management. This year, our audit of the government's financial statements involved most of our 200 financial auditors. It's the largest of the audits conducted by my office. You will find our audit opinion on the Government of Canada's consolidated financial statements starting on page 57 of Volume 1 of the Public Accounts of Canada 2021. We found that you can rely on the information contained in the financial statements. In all material respects, the information is presented fairly and conforms with generally accepted accounting principles for the public sector. In other words, we issued a clean opinion. This year, exceptionally, our opinion includes 2 dates. This is because the government amended its 2021 consolidated financial statements after it had approved them. The amendments were the result of a significant event that occurred later but before the statements were tabled in Parliament. When the government amends its financial statements, Auditing standards require my office to perform additional work to assess whether the amendments were recorded appropriately. The second date in our audit opinion represents the completion of our work on the amendments, which we determined were appropriately recorded.
Also includes an emphasis of matter paragraph. It highlights the significant impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on certain amounts presented in the government's consolidated financial statements and related notes. Every year, we provide Parliament with a commentary report that highlights important information about the results of our federal financial audits. This year, the commentary provides an overview of the government spending in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and discusses possible effects on the government's finances over the coming years. The commentary also describes the additional work we performed to respond to a motion from Parliament. As in previous years, the commentary raises observations about pay administration and national defense's inventory. These are recurring issues that we continue to monitor. For pay administration, we once again carried out detailed audit tests of salary transactions processed through the Phoenix pay system. We found that almost half of the employees in our sample were paid incorrectly at least once during the 2020-2021 fiscal year. Despite the significant number of individual pay errors, overpayments and underpayments partially offset each other. At the individual level, it's important to understand that these underlying problems and pay errors continue to affect thousands of people who are being paid incorrectly. We have been reporting for 18 years on National Defense's difficulties in recording its inventory. National Defense continues to implement the 10-year action plan it submitted to this committee in 2016. We did not see an overall improvement in the rate of errors in our sampling. In our view, errors in reported quantities and values are likely to continue until internal controls are strengthened and the departmental's plan is fully implemented. The commentary also provides insights into challenging areas this year. These insights are about cybersecurity and advances in the use of data in federal organizations. Mr. Chair, I would like to thank the senior officials and staff of the many departments, agencies, and Crown corporations involved in preparing the government's financial statements. We appreciate their collaboration during these challenging times. This concludes my opening remarks. We would be pleased to answer your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Hogan. Turning now to Mr. Dupé, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, for this opportunity to discuss the Public Accounts of Canada 2021. I'm pleased to be speaking to you from the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. Mr. Chairman, the public accounts include the audited consolidated financial statements for the 2020-21 fiscal year, which ended on March 31st, 2021, in addition to other unaudited financial information. I'm pleased to note that for the 23rd consecutive year, the Auditor General has issued an unmodified or clean audit opinion of these financial statements.
Once again, the accuracy of Canada's financial reporting and the Government of Canada's commitment as an institution to the responsible financial management and oversight of taxpayer dollars. I would like to thank the financial management community of the Government of Canada for their excellent work in helping to prepare the public accounts. Its members are responsible for maintaining detailed records of the transactions in their departmental accounts and maintaining strong internal controls. I would also like to recognize my colleagues at the Department of Finance and the Receiver General for their ongoing support and cooperation in producing the public accounts. And last but not least, I would like to thank the Office of the Auditor General for its continued cooperation and assistance. Permettez-moi de vous présenter quelques...
Allow me to present a few financial highlights from the documents. The government posted an annual deficit of $327.7 billion compared to a deficit of $39.4 billion in the previous year and $26.4 billion less than that projected in Budget 2021.
Drivers compared to the prior year relates to program expenses, excluding net actuarial losses. It increased by 270.1 billion, or close to 80% from 2020, largely reflecting transfers to individuals, businesses, and other level of government under the Economic Response Plan. Les comptes publics du Canada 2020.
The Public Accounts of Canada 2021 were tabled on December 14, 2021. The timing of the tabling was a result of the need to ensure that all necessary adjustments were made to the government's consolidated financial statements in response to a September 29, 2021 court decision, as well as factoring in the time necessary to print the books. This court decision altered the estimated contingent liability that was reported in the original financial statements completed on September 9th. The government considered the impact of the court ruling and concluded that it required an adjustment to its financial statements. Accordingly, the financial statements were reopened and adjusted after the closing entry was received from Indigenous Services Canada. This is explained in Volume 1, Section 2, Note 22, Subsequent Events. This revision is aligned with best practice as well as public sector accounting standards and Canadian auditing standards. In fact, standards require the auditor to consider facts up to the time that the financial statements are issued. The Auditor General then audited the revised estimated contingent liability and dual-dated her audit report date on November 19, 2021 to reflect the extension of her audit. The Public Accounts of Canada 2021 were then finalized, sent for printing, and tabled on December 14, 2021.
Decision necessarily delayed the publication of the public accounts. I would note that under the Financial Administration Act, the President of the Treasury Board is required to table the public accounts by December 31st, or if the House of Commons is not sitting during that period, within the first 15 days once the House reconvenes. I would also like to note that it is not unusual for public accounts to be tabled in December in years where there is a fall election. In 2019, for example, they were tabled on December 12th. In 2015, they were tabled on December 7th. Finally, Mr. Chair, as you know, the government committed to undertake a study of potential changes to the Public Accounts of Canada. We received preliminary feedback from the Library of Parliament on the presentation and format of the Public Accounts of Canada and have started engaging key stakeholders on potential changes to enhance their clarity and usability. Any proposed changes will be carefully examined to ensure the government's financial information continues to support transparency and accountability to parliamentarians and Canadians. Au fur et à mesure que ce
As this project advances, the government will continue to work closely with parliamentarians and stakeholders. Mr. Chair, thank you for your attention. This concludes my remarks.
Take any questions. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Mr. Huppé. Appreciate your
Thank you, Mr. Huppé.
Remarks there. Just committee members, I'm just going to turn to some business just for one moment. Because of the votes, we've lost some crucial time here. I'm informed by the clerk we have the opportunity to extend this meeting by 30 minutes to 1:30. We have translation services available. I will, of course, need unanimous consent for this to happen. So I'm looking for that consent, please. We will only be hearing from witnesses. There'll be no other committee business to discuss, so that time will not be used for to move any motions, to vote on any motions, I should say. It will be limited strictly to hearing from witnesses. So with that, could clerk, I can't see the room, so could you see if there's any dissension, or if we have unanimous consent to continue to by 30 minutes to 1:30?
Appears we have unanimous consent, sir.
Thank you very, very much. I appreciate it, and I hope our witnesses can stay with us. I understand there was one conflict. We will try to turn questions to the Deputy Minister of Finance, who has to leave, I believe, by 1:15, although maybe if he's permitted, or maybe if he has the opportunity, he can stay till 1:30, but I do understand you have a conflict and might have to recuse yourself at 1:15. I'm going to turn now to our first round. Mr. McCall, you have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Sorry, my voice is a bit raspy today. Ms. Hogan, it's good to see you again. Quick question, like who decided or who approached the Auditor General to reopen the books after you had signed off on them in September?
So there are two types of subsequent events, and an auditor.
I'm sorry, but who specifically approached the Auditor General, or was this the Auditor General's decision?
I spoke, so the Department of Finance and the Controller
Who in Finance, please?
The Associate Deputy Minister, Mr. Nick Leswick, and I spoke with Mr. Rakoupe.
Okay. Was there any thought of, no, the books are closed and signed off on?
Absolutely. The conversation is about what type of subsequent event, what was the nature, is there a need to? So there was lengthy discussions and then consultation with standards before the decision was made.
Okay. And who made the final decision, please?
The Government of Canada made the final decision. I do not know who within the government. You would have to ask.
There's 400,000 government employees.
Well,
when you say the government's not an entity. It's like, was it a physical person made the decision?
I would
Mr.
suggest
Sabia,
that perhaps you ask Mr. Rakoupe who exactly made that decision. I do not know who exactly.
Mr. Houpe?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So when the event happened, obviously, we had the obligation to take a look, what it meant to our previous estimates, and if it meant a material change to any of those estimates, particularly here the contingent liability.
If you could just stick to the question.
Yeah, I'm getting there. And
please get there.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Point of order.
Let him answer the question. That's not a point of order.
That's my point of order.
Go ahead.
You guys are going to play this game. Huh?
Thank you.
The point of order, Chair.
I'm listening.
Okay. I would just ask that our colleague allow witnesses to answer the question. There's been a lot of interruptions. I was going to raise a point of order earlier, but they seem to fade, but then now they've come back. So I understand the colleague has an interest in the matter. That's no problem. He's doing his job. But let's allow witnesses. Let's give them the courtesy to simply answer questions.
So I agree. Witnesses need to be given the courtesy to answer. Witnesses also need to, I think, when when the member is pressed for time, I do understand his urgency to get answers as well. So I'll try to balance that. But the floor is again back to you, Mr. McCauley.
Mr. Houpe, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. So in discussions with the department in question and in discussion with the Auditor General, obviously I made the call that we needed to modify and amend the previously signed statements because it was a material change and it was before tabling of the actual document. So I would have been...
Okay. In your memory, has this happened before? Public accounts being reopened?
Not in my memory. Well, not in my memory, to be honest with you. Not since I've been here, for sure. This is a very exceptional circumstance. We had an event, and it gave us information which we felt would putting us in a better position to revalue and reestimate potential liability, and the difference was material. So therefore, we needed to make sure. Yeah, we needed to make sure.
Have you ever had a similar event? Has this ever come up before? Like, surely we've had lawsuits settled, we've had oil shocks, price changes.
Yeah. So in my recollection and experience, we have usually events that happen after March 31st and before the actual first audit report is signed. I've seen that happen where we adjust based on this new information. This time it happened again after the signing, and because there was a lag time. We needed the House to table, obviously, the public accounts because there was such a lag time because of the elections and reconvening of the House. I felt.
Let me interrupt you there. You talk about a lag time because of the election, but even with the election, they were signed off on September 9th, so they were ready to table. immediately.
there was
So
no
I don't see that as an excuse.
No, there was no parliament to table into. The parliament reconvened on
Right,
November 19th, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, well, you could have tabled it then. Let me ask you, what would have happened if you hadn't reopened it? Like, what cataclysmic event would have happened if we hadn't reopened, if we just tabled the books as originally signed off?
Well, the Auditor General was aware that there was new information. They would, I don't know what the Auditor General would have done, but my opinion is that there was a chance that the books would have been qualified.
Right.
So again,
Mrs. Hogan, would you have reopened them on your own without the government approaching?
So the decision to reopen the financial statements once they've been signed off is not one for me to make. The decision that I can make is the impact on my audit opinion. I can tell you that the Government of Canada's financial statements have not had a double dating before since accrual accounting, but we have double dated an audit report in the past, back in 2010. There was a double dating of the Public Service Pension Plan audit report for a similar event, a lawsuit that was settled subsequent to year end. It is very rare that subsequent events are of such importance that the financial statements need to be adjusted.
Do you think
but
this
in
is?
this case, it was a decision.
Do you think
for the
this is a
government to
case
make,
of such importance as you just mentioned?
I looked at why the adjustment was made and how it was made, and I believe it was appropriate, which is why my opinion is an unmodified opinion and has been double dated to take into account the one event that adjusted the financial statements.
But you mentioned the wording of such importance. Do you believe this is of such importance to reopen audited books?
It was financially significant. And had a pervasive effect on many liabilities. And so it was important enough by the preparers, which is the Controller General's office, to be adjusted. And then because that adjustment occurred, the standards require that I audit it and opine on it, which I have done and issued a clean opinion.
Okay. So it's solely the government's decision then to reopen.
At this point it is. But as I mentioned earlier, there are different types of subsequent events. And as soon as the year end ends, before the financial statements are signed off and an audit opinion is issued, the government as well as the auditors are required to consider all events and decide whether or not they have an impact that's important enough to adjust financial statements, be disclosed in the financial statements, or just be left to the subsequent year. In this case, between when the financial statements were signed and finished but not made public, the onus really does lie with the government, the preparer, to determine if something is important enough to reopen the books. Then my job becomes, was that an appropriate action? I signed off on a clean opinion indicating that I agreed that it was.
Okay. How much time do you have?
You've got time for a comment, 15 seconds, so not a question, Mr. McCauley.
No, that's fine. Thanks very much.
Thank you then. Turning now to our next member, Ms. Bradford, you have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you. And thank you to our witnesses today, those returning and those that are new. It is a treat to see witnesses in the room, live and in person. So it's been a while since that has happened. So Ms. Hogan, I was wondering, could you please explain to the committee why it's important that you certify the public accounts and whether Canadians can trust them?
Absolutely. There's a requirement in legislation, both in the Financial Administrations Act and the Auditor General Act, that I issue an opinion on the consolidated financial statements of the Government of Canada. The government's financial statements are an important accountability document. They are really sort of the closing loop of that accountability relationship that government has with Canadians. So you put out a budget to indicate how you plan to spend, and the financial statements is the accounting of how you actually spend money, taxpayers' money. So it's important to compare those financial statements against generally accepted accounting principles and ensure that they provide transparent and just accounting of the financial results for the year as well as the financial position of the government. My opinion, which is done in accordance with accounting standards, allows you to then rely on the fact that the information in those financial statements and accompanying notes is reliable. So you can now look at the statements and say the content is one that Canadians can rely on and base decisions on.
Great, thank you for that. Can you tell me what you think of the GC InfoBase tool? Do you think it helps the public understand what is in the public accounts?
There is a considerable amount of information in the GC InfoBase tool. I think even within the 3 volumes of the Public Accounts of Canada, there is a considerable amount of information. And for someone who doesn't feel comfortable with financial information, it can be somewhat overwhelming. So I think any opportunity to streamline or make it easier to understand is one that financial statement preparers, in this case the government and Crown corporations, should always consider.
Okay, thank you. Turning now to Mr. Sabia, finance transfers to other levels of a government were really up due to the emergency pandemic supports. Did any of the provinces leave a lot of money on the table that was transferred to them?
Mr. Chair, by and large, those transfers have been used, in effect consumed substantially by all of the provinces, whether they were transfers to support the healthcare system in provinces, whether they were designed to facilitate the reopening of schools, et cetera. There were a variety of different measures that the government took at the time. And based on our discussions with provinces, we're certainly satisfied that that money was spent in large measure, and that's done and its mission accomplished.
Okay, thank you. And can you tell us about the government's debt management strategy and how the public accounts compared to what was recently announced in the budget of 2022?
Well, as a result of a substantially improving the deficit track that the government laid out both in the past and certainly in the most recent budget, the financial requirements of the Government of Canada are declining. As a result of that, needless to say, our debt management strategy reflects that because we need to borrow less. So the first important thing that has changed and is a reflection of what I'll call the normalization of the government's fiscal position as the COVID crisis recedes. The first thing is that those financial requirements are coming down and coming down quite substantially. That's number one. Number two, the other thing that we are and have been indeed attempting to accomplish over the last while has been to extend the term of the debt portfolio itself so that the government in future years can benefit from what are quite low interest rates during the period, the immediate preceding period and even indeed the current period today. So we continue to want to term out the debt to get the benefit of those low interest rates for as long as we can as we try to lock in the benefit for the overall fiscal picture of the government for as long as we can. As a result of those efforts, the overall term on average of the government's debt portfolio has lengthened from when we began this work, which was at that point, it was about a 5-year term. Now it's something closer, quite close to a 7-year term. So those are the two big drivers of our debt management strategy: lower requirements and longer duration.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Bradford, you have about 15 seconds as well. Time for a comment, not really a question.
Oh, really? That went very quickly. For the Treasury Board, the public accounts recorded an exceptional year. Was there anything about it that made it harder to put together the public accounts this year, maybe quickly?
And I'm afraid I'm going to have that answer in another round. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Turning now to our next, notre prochaine députée, Madame Sinclair.
Our next question was Ms. Sinclair de Gagné. You have 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I'd like to salute the witnesses who came in person. It That's great, as my colleague said, and I wish to thank those who are on Zoom with us. Let me jump into the crux of the matter. If we look at the public accounts very specifically, we realize that Crown corporations were not disclosing information in the same way as departments. Let me explain. One example, in Volume 3 of the Public Accounts of Canada, agencies and departments must provide a detailed list of all payments to an individual or organization totaling more than $100,000 for professional services, acquisition of buildings, land, transfer payments, Section 6. This list includes the name of organizations and the city where they're headquartered. So that's a requirement. My question is probably first for Treasury Board. Why is it that Crown corporations don't have to provide the same information, whereas it's a very important vehicle for funding the federal government? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Of course, some Crown corporations report on an IFRS basis. Many reports are published on their individual websites that provide a multitude of information. The financial information is consolidated. There are two different approaches depending whether the Crown Corporation gets appropriations or not. They're consolidated with the financial statements. Mustn't forget that whatever's subject to Volume 3 is not information that's audited by the Auditor General of Canada in this case. But what I would say is that, of course, there's a myriad of information available directly on the websites of these organizations. Yes, indeed, there's a lot of information, thank you, but not the same level of detail. Can you tell me whether some legislation or regulation has to be changed so that these Crown corporations have the same obligation to divulge? Well, from a standpoint of preparing financial statements, Crown corporations follow standard private sector rules in some cases. We follow public sector organization rules. Whatever's not audited means that these Crown corporations are not subject to Treasury Board policies. Often we ask them to follow basic principles. That having been said, they have their own policies in place and their own reporting practices. When you say we could, or it could be the Treasury Board that requires that these departmental rules are applied? No, the standard rules that apply to Crown corporations apply. We can't change that. Now, when you consolidate financial statements from Crown corporations that present their financial statements on an IFRS basis, as I call it, we transpose them into our accounting practices so that we can consolidate them. That's what you see in Volume 1 when it comes to financial statements. What I'm talking about here, of course, is Volume 2, Volume 3 are not audited information. These are additional numbers that are provided. Crown corporations also provide additional information through their organizational plans and so forth. Now, talking about those plans, I've noticed as well that the vast majority of Crown corporations don't have an action plan. That was raised by the Auditor General. The action plans are not approved by the government, and their financial statements are not disclosed in the same way. So let me put the question a different way. I'm a citizen, and I'd like to know where a Crown corporation that does a lot of funding, let's say Export Development Canada, in what province, in what region of Canada does it provide this funding? Where does it spend money? There's no way for me to get that information. I know because I checked, my team checked. That information does not exist. Don't you think it would be necessary for Canadians and Quebecers who are interested in that information can obtain it? So that's a very specific question. Who could ask these Crown corporations to disclose this information? I'm not sure the Treasury Board could. I think it would have to be legislated, I presume, so that that information is disclosed. Each Crown Corporation has a board of directors that could play a key role in establishing certain rules. They could ask that that information be published in that way or in a different way. But right now, as things stand, Crown Corporation generally don't follow those same policies. They're not subject to Treasury Board policies. As I said earlier, we try to convince them to do so as much as possible. So when you say you try to convince them, do you have any specific examples? Well, for instance, it can be policies that dictate what is reimbursable for hospitality or travel. Those Crown corporations have a right to have a different travel and hospitality policy. What we try to make sure of that there is common space between what is refundable and what is not when employees travel, as an example. Okay, that's already 6 minutes. I'm so sorry.
For 6 minutes, over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank all the witnesses for being present today, and I want to thank those especially who are in person. It's a delight to see you all here. Welcome to our committee. I do want to begin by reflecting the comments from the Auditor General related to some of the financial control weaknesses related to the pay administration system. This is something that's been going a very long time, and I continue to get phone calls. People, regular folks, Canadians are growing more and more concerned with the fact and reality that we continue to have this immense problem. I've spoken to members of our public service, including PSAC, who has echoed these concerns, and I find it, I would be remiss not to mention them and to ensure that we find a better and more transparent process to ensuring that employees who work for us, who do good work on behalf of the Government of Canada, continue to have that support. And I think that's something that they deserve, and it's something that's critical to our ongoing efforts to make sure that this place works well. And so to the Auditor General, can you explain how the audited process led to the findings of the HR to pay process and when that process began, and more particularly from this audit, how many outstanding pay action requests were there?
I will likely ask Etienne or Chantal to add a little bit about the outstanding pay action requests. But what I can tell you about the audit is that we began in 2016 when the Phoenix pay system was implemented and the entire HR to pay process was changed within the federal government. Our entire audit approach needed to change because of weaknesses in the IT system and so many changes around the manual processes feeding into that IT system. So since then, we've been doing detailed transactions of actual pay for employees instead of relying on automated computer controls. This year's audit found that 47% of the individuals in our sample were still had an error in their pay at least once during the fiscal year, compared to about 51% the year prior. What's concerning is that about 41% of those people were still waiting for their pay to be adjusted at year end. What we looked at then was the pay action request. There will always be requests in a system to have adjustments to pay, but what was particularly concerning was that a large portion, almost 20% of those pay action requests have been outstanding for more than 3 years. So individual public servants have been waiting a very long time to have their pay adjusted and to be accurate. When it comes to actual pay action requests outstanding, I think I might ask one of my colleagues if you would like some more details on the actual numbers.
Yeah, please. I think it's important just to demonstrate the fact that this year, my understanding is that there were 254,500 outstanding pay action requests. And there was, apparently that's a big improvement from 334,000 requests that were filed the year before. I don't see that as an improvement. Like, how can that, I can see how it's an improvement to some folks, but 254,000 pay action requests. That's people who work around here, people who work across our country. 3 years. It's extremely unacceptable. We have to find better ways to do this. So my question to the Auditor General is, what steps should the government take to reduce this number of outstanding pay action requests, and how can we do that quickly?
Well, we've issued recommendations to the government on ways to improve the internal controls and the whole processing around the HR to pay system. It is important that they act on those. It's important that they act on long outstanding pay action requests to correct people's pay. Also of good importance is no matter what system you go to, while they are looking to transition to a new system, you need to have accurate data. So you need to get an individual's pay corrected now before you move them to a new system, or even if you stay in this system. So it's important to find a way to tackle all of the issues surrounding the entire HR to pay process.
In your opinion, Ms. Hogan, what has been the major barrier, or at least response from the ministry? This has been going on since 2016. Why hasn't this been remedied?
I think there are a few reasons behind why this hasn't been remedied. It's a shared process. There are many parties involved in pay. Each individual department has the responsibility to enter accurate information about a new employee or changes to an employee's pay. Some departments rely on the pay center. Other departments do not rely on the pay center. Everyone uses the Phoenix pay system, where there are some limitations in the system to deal with the pay of the federal government. The federal government is sort of a pay behind, right? We pay a few weeks later, whereas the system is more real time. So as soon as you have a real time adjustment that's not reflected in a timely way, there could be a possibility to have an error in pay. So it's about lining all of that up and fixing the complex web of rules around compensation.
Mr. Chair, is that how much time?
My apologies.
You got 30 seconds. Time for a quick question and quick answer.
Sure. Okay. So in terms of what I tell our public service employees who come to me and ask for a remedy and fix and for some kind of project that's going to address their concerns going into the future on this, what do we tell our public 254,000 people, or at least pay requests, that we haven't got it right yet? The government continues to fail with the Phoenix pay system. Do we tell them the government's working on it still?
And just could you let the witness just a quick answer, please?
Honestly, I think the best answer to that question comes from the government. We continue to follow up on it and to monitor it, to make recommendations and to push them to improve their internal controls and their processes. But the action rests with the federal government to fix it.
Doing it right. They're just not doing it. That's the problem.
Thank you. That ends our first round. Turning now to round number 2. Turning back to Mr. McCauley, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Great. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Ms. Hogan, I just want to get back to the tabling dates of the public accounts. C.D. Howe last year, I think, gave us, the federal government, an F compared to the other province, or compared to the provinces getting A's and B's on fiscal reporting, mostly around the delays in tabling the public account. Do you see an issue with them being tabled so late, especially around transparency and accountability, especially to Parliament?
I believe you referenced some real fundamental principles to audited information. It needs to be relevant and shared in a timely way, and it needs to be understandable and comparable to its counterparts. So obviously, being able to issue the audited financial statements in a more timely way should always be a goal that both the government and my office strive for. The timelines that the government uses now are you should be asking them about how and if they plan to modify those.
Do you see a reason why we can't have it September 30th? Every year legislated?
I don't necessarily understand all of the complexities of putting the financial statements together. I can talk to you about how long it takes to audit, but that question is better asked to the Comptroller General's office.
Perhaps Mr. Hoope, I apologize if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. Is there a reason we cannot do it by September 30th? And I'll preface this. I understand in the Senate, TBS said it was too complicated to do by September 30th.
Wouldn't we, honestly, we've looked at that before. I'm not saying, first of all, in most years, it's tabled around mid to end of October. So September 30th would be very aggressive. our year closes on March 31st. We've got, the tax revenues basically on personal income tax, which plays a big part. People have up until April 30th. We need to then accrue those revenues that have still not received by these dates. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done to close the book. Then a lot of work also, because we had this discussion when I was CFO at CRA with the Auditor General, because they need to audit these books.
Yeah, is it doable?
Is it doable? Unless something changes drastically and we change the dates, I would tell you that by signing the books and the audit completed very early in September, that's very aggressive. So again, we've seen the tabling date early October in some years. It is feasible and possible, but it is very aggressive with the current processes, I would say.
Are you satisfied with the accountability and transparency to Parliament then, having the dates as it is? The reason I ask, if I look, this year it comes out, and quite often comes out later. Parliament's asked to vote on fall economic statement. We're asked to vote on SUP-As after or before we know how the government actually performed the previous year. We see the departmental results come out later than, this year was December. So again, we're being asked to approve money when we don't even know how the government was able to produce previous year.
Definitely, Mr. Chair, I would tell you that my goal would be to table around mid-October and as early as possible. I understand the issues and the importance of that information being tabled as early as possible. But again, within the processes, within the time it takes to audit, our goal will always to be as quick as possible, honestly, and recognizing that we need Parliament to sit to be able to table them.
Okay. Just a quick question again on the that subsequent event. Could we have not have just accrued properly for that settlement? Because we do accrue expected losses. Yeah. We kind of knew what the Human Rights Court had asked for, so we knew what the total was.
Yeah. So first of all, and you're right, the projected contingent liabilities is basically an estimate based on the information that we have. The thing that we have to do is be in a position to substantiate the amount that we put forward. So in this particular event, the information or the decision of the court was not known. There was a judicial review on the table. It was not known where the court was going to what the decision of the court would be. So that particular decision gave us that added information and more clarity on the actual compensation in this particular case. So again, we felt at that time that we had enough information to basically readjust and amend properly. Like I said, if we don't have,
does reopening the books and then pushing this $10 billion into the previous year, what's the effect on this year on the debt to GDP ratio? What does it change it?
Just time for a quick answer, please.
Yeah, you'd have to calculate, I'd have to redo the calculation with 10 billion removed from the, so it probably, I wouldn't want to pronounce myself, but 10 billion over the maximal spend is probably, yeah.
Okay.
And this year, sorry.
Thanks. Thank you very much. I'm sure we'll come back to that. Turning now to Mr. Dong, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I want to thank all the witnesses and again, Auditor General for coming today. My first question is to staff on finance. Canada's debt to GDP ratio is 47% now, up from 31, maybe a couple years ago. How does that compare to our G7 allies? What's the average for the G7 nations?
Well,
yes, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, the answer to that question is pretty straightforward. Based on the International Monetary Fund's comparisons that they do across countries, that Canada, on a debt to GDP basis, is actually within the G7 has the most favorable debt to GDP ratio of any country in the G7. it's a similar story of strength on the deficit as well, where again we are a leader within the G7. And then third, when you look at the rate of deficit reduction of all of these countries coming out of the pandemic, where all countries saw their deficits increase, saw their debt to GDP ratios increase, the speed with which Canada is returning to pre-pandemic paths, particularly with respect to the deficit outlook, it is among the very fastest of the G7.
I want to get a couple of big questions in. So this is the first one, and a small follow-up. What's the percentage of the charge to service the debt versus GDP?
Do you have the number?
And how is it compared to previous years, especially under the especially during those financial crisis or in the 90s when the interest rate was high?
Thank you for the question. I'd best reference page 34 of the volume 1 of the public accounts, which shows you our interest ratio as a percentage of revenues and just the downward trajectory over the last, I guess, 30 years or so, owing to this kind of secular decline in interest rates and the government refinancing its debt at an effective interest rate that's much lower than it was 30 years ago. And you can see that reference on page 33 as well.
Okay, so it's lower than, much lower than 30 years. I want to change the channel a little bit. My question to Auditor General. I noticed in the report that there were significant amount of money lost to fraudulent activities in the last 2 years. And I cite, I think it's in total $326 million lost revenue, public money, property in 2021 to fraudulent activities. And this is one thing I've been hearing a lot from my constituents. Phone fraud and email fraud. I think it says here, Receiver General reported the incident has gone up 31.6% in 2019-2020. And the number of misdirected electronic payments to individuals and businesses more than doubled, jumped 130.5% in 19 to 20. That's a lot. So what's happening? Why is all of a sudden the increase of phone fraud and email fraud? And these are preying on the most vulnerable in our society.
I'm not sure that I actually have a good answer for you on this. I think what we're seeing is that there are always bad actors in the world, and they will prey on the most vulnerable. And many took advantage of the pandemic, with everything being online, virtual, so much more reliance on IT. That they took advantage of individuals. I think when we look at our audits, we don't design our audit to detect fraud, but we do expect that the government has internal controls in place in order to prevent and detect fraud. And we do design our procedures and make sure that we make them random, and we do different procedures in order for us to identify fraud if we can, and we would make the government aware if that did occur.
Yeah, I think it's seriously.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dong. I'm afraid that is all the time, but we will be back to your side again. Turning now to la prochaine députée.
The next member will be Ms. Saint-Clair Desgagnés. You have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my questions are for the witnesses from the Department of Finance, and goes along the same vein as the questions on fraud with CERB and similar programs. I was wondering if you had an idea of the amounts. The exact amount is not yet known, of course, but do you know how many billions of dollars were erroneously paid out to people? Well, Mr. Chairman, In cooperation with our colleagues at the Department of Revenue and other departments, we're verifying the amounts. For the time being, we do not have a specific idea. I can't give you specific amounts. We are aware of the fact that given the significance of the effort the government properly deployed and the nature and the extent of the economic and human crisis caused by the pandemic, the government reacted very rapidly. And yes, we do have work to do to check that. There are and there will be processes to correct these situations. And if an individual received an amount erroneously, there will be a process. Okay, two short follow-up questions. When do you think there'll be an answer? You say there's a process. Is there a deadline? And the second brief question, can you give me an order of magnitude, since you can't give us a specific number? As you know, in economics, we like to have figures. Well, Mr. Chairman, I cannot give you a deadline that is specific. We're working with our colleagues as quickly as possible. We're fully aware of the importance of this issue. And to answer your second question, I cannot give you an order of magnitude right now. We have a lot of work left to do. Thank you. Not even some kind of idea? Will it be by 2025, 2030, by the end of the year? As quickly as possible, madam. Thank you. There you are. Thank you very much. Next question.
Desjardins, you have the floor for 2.5 minutes, please. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I want to now pick up questioning related to some of the emergency benefits that the government had rolled out, and to talk specifically about some of the instances where I believe misuse of the funds occurred, and I believe Canadians would agree. I want to highlight an issue that began in my city of Edmonton related to a company called Cesco. Cesco locked out their employees. They were given a notice, and they've been locked out for over 300 days now. I think it's something around 400 days they've been locked out. During that period of time, Cesco applied and received assistance through the CEWS or CRUISE program, the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy. The program itself was intended to ensure that workers can continue to operate and that workers were to get the benefit from this. In this particular instance, this company did not provide that benefit to any one of their employees, rather locked them out and then hired scab labor in order to accommodate that deficit at a lower wage. To continue on that vein, that same company then paid over $2 billion to its shareholders between April and September. This is all well documented and reported on in the news. However, the company continued to take in the benefit. So to all the Canadians that whose taxpayers went to a for-profit company for the purpose of protecting workers that kicked them out, what do we tell those members, and how can we get justice for the Canadian taxpayer when for-profit companies walk out with $2 billion? What process does that look like? You mentioned a process to my honorable colleague here from the block about a process for remedying damages. How do we remedy this kind of damage to private companies? Finance.
Again, Mr. Chairman, Chairman.
You're correct, either, but thank you. You've got about 35 seconds to answer the question if you need it.
Okay, TikTok. I'm sure the members will understand that we're not in a position to comment on a specific company because we're not.
Okay, sure. Companies then. Companies that misuse the public trust in this sense.
We're not close to a specific event or a specific set of circumstances. I do think it's important to stand back and understand. I mean, the basic objective of that program was to rapidly deliver financial assistance to maintain the working relationship between a company and its employees. If in a circumstance where there have been lockouts, et cetera, again, I can't comment on the specifics. Certainly, we can look into and pass on to our Revenue Canada colleagues
who are responsible for this to see whether there are any particular circumstances associated with that.
But to the
And that's
question,
something that we're happy to
what
do.
process? You mentioned a process. What does that process look like?
And Mr. Desley, I'm going to have to end it there, but you will have another round to come back to it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So, yeah, thank you. And turning now to Mr. Lawrence, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. I'm going to split my time with Mr. McCauley, but just a couple of hopefully quick questions here. For Mr. Houpe, when we look at the reopening of the accounts, it strikes me as strange, because there certainly have been material events that have occurred in the last 20, 30, 50 years, and yet this is the first time we've reopened opened the books. And I'm curious as to where none of those other events that have happened, and we could go through them over the last 50, 100 years, and we've never, to my knowledge, reopened those book counts. What made this particular tribunal decision so much more have so much more importance than, say, September 11th? You're on mute, sir.
Oh, there you go. Sorry about that. First of all, when something happens, it needs to create a potential impact on one of your estimates that you've done in preparing the financial statement. Obviously, the financial statements had not been tabled at this time. We had information that provided us with sufficient information. We had an event that provided us sufficient information that we felt that that the new number, the new estimate, was actually was very different. So again, we have materiality. When the auditor audits us, there's a level of materiality. So this was way beyond the materiality. So again, we're getting in a zone of getting a potential qualification if it wasn't registered in the proper or accounted for in the proper fashion. So there are subsequent events.
Thank you.
Sometimes
Thank you. Just a quick question. I appreciate that. My time is limited. Just to the Auditor General, if in fact the books hadn't been reopened, would you have given a qualification on the audit?
I mean, that's a very difficult question to answer. The books were reopened. The amount was a significant amount, and it is a very unique and rare situation. But I believe that the adjustment was appropriate. So if the adjustment had not occurred, I would have had to have considered whether or not my opinion should be adjusted. Yes.
You would consider, but that's not a yes or no. Would you have qualified? You have all the facts in front of you, Auditor General, with respect. You should be able to let us know whether you would have given a qualification.
Well, as I said, there are two types of subsequent events, right? This is the kind of event, because the books had been signed off, the opinion had been issued, the responsibility here to adjust rested with the Government of Canada. If it had happened before September the 9th, before we had issued our audit opinion, absolutely. If an adjustment had not occurred, I would have felt that the financial statements did not accurately represent the best estimate of the liability at that point.
Okay, I'll give the rest of my time to Mr. McCauley then.
Great, thanks.
You have the floor for 2 minutes.
Oh, Mr. Savia.
Yeah.
Welcome. It's kind of neat having probably the closest to a celebrity we'll actually have in public accounts. I want to just chat with you quickly regarding.
I should talk to my colleagues in the department. They don't buy that.
Just quickly chat with you about when we talked about net versus gross debt to GDP. Obviously, the government says, and I think you just referenced this, we've got the lowest net. Wondering if you could weigh in on, I'm sure you've seen the Fraser Institute's report about a not so fast when considering net as opposed to gross. I think we're the only G7 country that tabulates our debt, adding in assets from the CPP and the QPP. Do you think it's a fair, standard to use? Should we not be using gross debt because because we do have that liability we will have to pay out to the seniors?
Chair, these calculations that are done by the IMF, they have to make a number of adjustments to try to make each country comparable to the other.
Right.
One of the things...
But let me just, on that point, what other G7 countries, though, you have assets in a CPP like we have? I don't think the others do. I think they all buy government bonds.
Take Norway.
But they're not a G7 country.
No, but it's a country that in many ways is comparable to Canada, and I just want to give you the example of the Norwegian sovereign fund, Norges Bank. because of the magnitude of that fund, which is well in excess of $1 trillion, that has a huge impact on the debt position of Norway as it's evaluated
right, but
by the
sticking
IMF.
with the G7, though, because that's what we constantly heard, and that's
No,
what you referenced earlier, though.
But that change in the methodology that's applied by the IMF is applied consistently across countries. So all countries that have similarly structured,
What
for
do you think
instance,
of the
pension
Fraser
plans to ours
Institute's
would be
report?
treated comparably.
Yeah, what do you think of the Fraser Institute's comments that
I'm gonna have-
when you use
Mr.
gross,
Macaulay,
we
I'm gonna
drop
have
to
to cut it
4th
there.
and 29th out of 38 in the OECD?
Yeah, and we're going to have to pause there.
Thanks.
You'll have your side will have another opportunity. Turning now to Ms. Yip, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
I appreciate all the witnesses for being here and answering the questions, as well as bearing with us while we had our votes. Mr. Hupé, what financial reports are available during the year to update the public in the meantime before the public accounts are tabled?
Well, there's a slew of information out there, obviously, that gets made public during the year. A few come to mind, obviously, on a monthly basis. We have what we call the fiscal monitor, that basically updates on the actual spending and revenues of the government compared to previous years with an analysis of the variance. And again, like I said, that's on a monthly basis. There's also quarterly financial reports that are produced by each respective departments that, again, provide information on that particular department's spend and compares it to previous years. Then obviously there's a slew of information that's proactively disclosed every quarter, let it be on travel, hospitality, on transfer payment, and so on. So again, but I would say the two key ones with obviously finances fiscal updates throughout the year are probably the key ones to update the public on the government spend.
Thank you. Mr. Sabia, can you tell us about the government's debt management strategy and how the public accounts compare to what was recently announced in Budget 2022?
Chair, I think in answer to previous question, I think the two most important aspects of that are, one, the significant reduction by about $200 billion reduction in our borrowing requirements that's gone on. That's obviously important and reflects a stronger economic recovery and therefore significant changes, strengthening of the deficit track of the government. And then second, the point I made about extending the duration of the portfolio. So those are the two most important things. I guess I would also say, with respect to our public debt charges, that's something that we look at pretty carefully. Right now, in the base case, I think for 22-23, those debt charges as a percentage of GDP are about 1%. They step up a little bit over the fiscal planning period up to about 1.3 or 1.4% of GDP. But all of that is well below the 2 to 2.5% that those public debt charges were, say, just before the financial crisis. So all that to say, I think from a fiscal stability and systemic stability point of view, a lot of progress has been made here with respect to the government's overall debt management.
Thank you. Ms. Hogan, many Canadians work very hard to receive a pension, and I'm going to refer to page 200 of Volume 1, looking at the Canada Pension Plan accounts. There's an increase from $2.6 billion to $6.75 billion in assets available for benefit payments. And last week, Statistics Canada released some new statistics with regards to populations, and there was a definite increase in seniors aged 85 and up. In fact, this age group has doubled since 2001, and with 1 in 5 seniors will be 65 and up. I'm just wondering, do we have enough, or are we planning enough for our seniors to take care of them with the Canada pensions?
So that's a very interesting question that the government, I think, would be in the best position to answer. There are two different kinds of valuations that you can get from an actuary, one for accounting purposes, which we look at and consider when we issue an opinion on the Canada Pension Plan, and one for funding purposes. And it's that funding purpose one that really does give an independent perspective to the government based on actuarial determinations about life expectancy and inflation and so many inputs, whether or not the Canada Pension Plan is sufficient to meet its future needs. I think that would be a better place to sort of ask the question and get a good answer. But I think it is clear that we see it even within the public service pension plan, that there's an intergenerational issue with such a large amount of the population getting ready to or already accessing pension plans that are out there, and very less people joining the workforce to continue to input in them. So it's a good question to ask the government about the sufficiency of the funding.
And thank you very much. That is all the time. We've just finished our second round. Moving into the third round now. Turning to Mr. McCauley again. You're our star today on the Conservative bench anyway. So back to you. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Back to the celebrity. Actually, do you mind if we just pick up, because you got cut off there, Mr. Sabia? Just about again, net to gross. I mean, okay. Should we be using both? I know one does not reflect as well media-wise, but should we be doing both?
Chair, we're gonna give you a double-barreled answer. First, I'll just comment on the numbers, and then I'm going to turn to my colleague, Nick Leswick, who is just
real brief, though, because I've got a couple other questions for Ms. Hogan.
All right, so we'll suspend the tutorial from Nick on how these international adjustments are made. But, Mr. Chair, again, even if you look at this on a gross basis, Canada ranks either second or third in the G7, even on a gross basis.
Yeah, third.
So whether net or gross, the position of Canada is quite strong on a global basis.
Well, and I appreciate that, but I think the reason I bring it up, when you look at net, we are 1. When you look at gross, which is more apples to apples, we drop to third. OECD, I think we dropped from 8 to 29, so it is quite significant. I'm just concerned that I realize it's politics, but I find it bit misleading the public when we cherry pick numbers to present to the public. But I really appreciate what you're saying. It is not as easy as being put forward. Appreciate that. Ms. Hogan, just want to go back to you. It's been well publicized funding issues for your office. Just wondering, how many years has the Office of the Auditor General requested budget increases and added resources, and how many years have you been declined for that? And do you know the reasons why those requests were declined?
To my knowledge, the first time we actually made a formal request was probably in 2017, following the deficit reduction action and then the increase in our work. So Mr. Ferguson at that time requested funding. He only received a portion of the funding that he requested, and then we asked every year subsequent to that until we received funding in 2021. The reasons why it was because we are treated like every other department, and our funding request goes into the mix and is factored when decisions are made as to where funding is allocated.
Right. It strikes me as a bit of a conflict of interest where the government is deciding how much to pay the auditors to audit themselves. Should this be something that Parliament should be deciding independently of the government for the Auditor General's office?
So, Mr. Chair, many MPs might recall that when I was appointed and resubmitted a request for funding, even during my confirmation hearings, I made it clear that not only did we need funding to address the short term and medium term, but in the long term, trying to have a mechanism that would be independent of the departments that we audit is one that I think that would further enhance my office's independence. And it is one that we see in certain provinces and in other countries. So I do believe that finding a solution to a stable, long-term, independent funding mechanism is the next logical step to making sure the office is adequately funded going forward.
So you'd support legislation stating September 30th for a drop dead for the public accounts, and then the Parliament deciding your budget, I assume. Can you, one last question for you. It's on page 18 of, and maybe even the finance folks can explain it. If you could dumb it down for us, the accounting for Bank of Canada's purchase of Government of Canada bonds, the $19 billion loss there, it's in volume 1. Can you walk it through us on a real low-level basis?
I will do my best, and then I invite if a member from the Department of Finance would like to add, they are more than welcome to.
Repurchasing bonds and...
Yep, this was a measure that the Bank of Canada did to inject liquidity into the market. So they purchased Government of Canada bonds off of the market. Those Government of Canada bonds were not retired. They're still out there. So when you consolidate and pick up the Bank of Canada and put it into the government, you can't hold your own assets, and so you need to have an accounting treatment to eliminate those assets. They purchased the bonds at a value that was higher than what they were issued at, to the tune of $19 billion. And that then is recorded as an expense in the government's financial statements. It's to recognize that the value of the bonds had increased since their issuance, and in order to buy them back, you needed to pay a premium on them. And then I invite the Department of Finance perhaps to add, if you have follow-up questions.
Well, no, I'm afraid Mr. Macaulay is out of time here. There will be, I think, time for another round, but we're going to move on to Mr. Fragiscatos. You have the floor now for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. Before I get into questions, and I'm sure this is just a simple error, Chair, but I do think that we need to follow our routine proceedings that we've passed collectively as a committee. Today, Chair, Mr. Macaulay in the first round was given a total of 8 minutes, allotted 6, but given a total of 8. He's very happy about that. But again, paying attention to the routine proceedings, even with a point of order, he was at 7:30, so a minute and a half over. In his second round, he was allotted 5. It was clearly close to 6 minutes. And Liberal members, along with the Bloc and the NDP, have been kept very close to time. I would just urge, Chair, that we pay attention to routine proceedings and give members allotted time and allow them to ask questions without going very overboard in terms of time. With that said,
of course, yeah, right. Of course. Look, I as soon as I heard point of order, I hit the pause on his clock. There was some back and forth there. In this meeting in particular, I've been trying to keep it as close to time as possible. In fact, I believe I also cut him off at 15 seconds near the end as well. So having said that, point taken. Your time is. I'm going to give you time from the top because I don't want to take away from your time. So go ahead for 5 minutes, please.
Yeah, no, as I say, Chair, just important for me to say, and I'm sure it was a simple mistake. Mr. Savia, you've wanted to, and thank you, by the way, for the work that you've done during the pandemic to your colleagues as well, to the whole department. You've wanted to put on the record today and haven't had a chance to the adjustments that you've referred to with respect to the IMF. I wonder if you did want to note that for the record. I think, and it would benefit the committee for us to know as well.
There's no one I know who's mastered that better than Nick Leswick. So over to you, Nick.
Okay.
Yeah, if it needs to be a matter of record to the committee, I mean, you can see the comparison between G7 countries on page 37, and then we outline the mechanics of going from the accumulated deficit basis, which is kind of the debt metric that you see in the public accounts and what the federal government reports on in its updates and budgets, how you get from there to this definition of total government net debt, which is what the IMF uses to compare on an internationally comparable basis. And I admit, I mean, there's a lot of gymnastics here, to be quite honest, because of the diversity in terms of how governments, one, how they operate, but at the sovereign level and the sub-sovereign level, how they fund their social security schemes, how they fund their internal, like, public service pension and benefit schemes. So the IMF has to do a series of mechanical adjustments to level set all these G7 countries. And so you can see those mechanics on page 38. The big elements here, though, is accounting for public sector pensions and benefits. So again, internal to government pensions and benefits, and then also, as the member opposite spoke to, is the inclusion of the CPP QPP assets. And a fundamental issue there is that most other G7 countries don't fund their social security schemes. So they take the equivalent of what is the CPP premium, and they bring it into their income statement, effectively managing these social security schemes on a pay-as-you-go basis. So to establish this level of comparability, the IMF, in kind of a distorted way, takes that into consideration and brings the assets of the CPP QPP into the accounts of Canada in order to compare these across G7 countries. So understand that your target of criticism, because it's like, you know, you have to ask yourself whether the assets of the CPP QPP would be available to the government in a time of distress, and I think clearly they, well, I'll leave it for some future government to decide, but but the algorithmic mathematical principle here, I think we could probably appreciate that we're trying to establish this comparability, which is why they're taking into consideration to achieve this bottom line. So I understand, you know, where others come out to in terms of the commentary, but that's just the mechanical explanation of what's going on there.
Okay, thank you. I noticed that in terms of the composition of expenses, there's a big difference. And you touched on this, Mr. Sabia, earlier in an answer, but I want to ask it again. Public debt charges in terms of composition of expenses for 2021, 3.2%. You look at 2020 in the public accounts, it's 6.5%. What accounts for the wide difference between the two, the large gap between the two?
Chair, could I just ask the member to just give me those numbers again, please?
Sure. The composition of expenses in 2021 as far as public debt charges are concerned was 3.2%. In 2020, the number was 6.5%. That is a very significant difference, and I just wonder what accounts for that.
Go ahead, Nick. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I mean, quite honestly, it's the miracle of low interest rates and just the kind of the impact that low interest rates have had on public debt charges. And as we roll over debt and refinance at lower rates, again, just speaking to kind of this, you know, secular decline in rates, but just the more dramatic recent decline in rates and how that's fed through the government's market debt stock.
Yeah, no, it was a significant difference. Just wanted to ask that and put it on the record. Thank you very much.
You still have 30 seconds.
I still have 30 seconds. Okay.
Yes.
Well, I was very careful to stay on time. So.
No, I was very careful to reset the clock.
Fair enough. I'm just looking at, in fact, as far as revenues are concerned, and there's a term here applied, the carbon pricing policy of the government, overall quite limited, not even 2%. Can you just confirm that?
Yeah, I think that's
right. So overall, a very limited amount. Okay, thank you very much.
And thank you very much. I'm just resetting my clock here. Turning now at la prochaine députée, Madame.
Ms. Sinclair-Degagné, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like the opinion from the Auditor General, Ms. Hogan, about accounting obligations of Crown corporations. As we look in more detail at the rules, we see that a Crown corporation has to disclose financial statements according to generally accepted accounting principles, but through regulation, accounting principles could be added, disclosure rules could be added for the financial statements. According to Ms. Hogan, is there any way to add this by regulation that they would have to disclose more detail in their financial statements. To follow my example, the name and headquarters of any organization receiving more than $100,000. Could that be done by regulation? Well, the question related to what accounting standards require, or IFRS for most Crown corporations, disclosure of spending is the way they manage the company. The information you're requiring or asking for is something that the government could ask Crown corporations to disclose, additional information, either through regulations or policy. But you have to be careful because Crown corporations are not subject to all Treasury Board policies. What's disclosed right now follows generally accepted accounting principles, but what you're asking for goes beyond that. Okay. So thank you, Ms. Hogan. I will put the question to Mr. Huppé. Through regulation, we could require that information, and Treasury Board could do that. Of course. Well, honestly, I would have to ask for an opinion from my colleagues at the Department of Justice about what to do in this situation. Each Crown Corporation reports to a portfolio department, if I can put it that way. There might be greater accountability through them. As I said earlier, you'd need legislation in these situations. All right. I'm sorry you have to stop there, but we'll get back on a fourth round of questions. So you'll have another 2.5 minutes then.
Mr. Desjardins, you have the floor for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And just want to pick up just where I left off with finance related to some of the programs and the benefits. So the three main benefits, if I understand correctly, there was, from the Auditor General's report here, there was some overpayments. So how much of these overpayments are recovered to date?
Mr. Chair, that's an ongoing process in the public accounts. I think the number is about $3.7 billion of overpayments. A lot of that, the majority of that, about $3 billion, is from the employment insurance system and the emergency measures that were taken there, and the remainder, about $700 million, is from the CERB. All of that is subject to ongoing auditing and verification from both Revenue Canada and from the Department of Employment and Social Development with respect to the EI component of it. And once those things are verified, then the usual processes will set in place between Revenue Canada and individuals who may have received these payments in error. And, while I wasn't there at the beginning of these programs, as a member I know knows, these programs were designed because of the importance of speed, that they were based on attestation from the individual who was receiving them. So honestly, based on an attestation system, it's not really surprising that there'll be instances of overpayment. How that gets handled, and I think those situations have to be handled carefully and sensitively to the circumstances of the individuals, and I believe that's the approach that the government will be taking to this.
And I'm not sure if I have enough time to get this on this question. Chair, how much time?
You've got about 25 seconds, so if you can keep your question brief and your answer brief.
Okay, I think I know the answer to this question, but I want to be able to make sure to ask it. Did the Government of Canada, during these three programs, take a gender-based analysis, a GBA plus? And what were the findings of that, and are they publicly available?
I don't know whether... Evelyn, you...
So, just to keep the answer brief, for all of the funding decisions that are communicated in budgets through the Gender Budgeting Act, there is GBA Plus that's disclosed in the impact reports.
Okay.
So we can follow up with the information to address your question.
So they're public availably now? They're available?
So
Mr. Desjardins, I'm going to stop there, but I guarantee you'll have another round.
Right on.
So
thanks,
that's
Chair.
why
we'll have a round to think
That's why
about
you're losing 10 seconds here or an answer here, but you'll have another chance. Turning now to Mr. Patzer, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the witnesses. I'm going to start with the Department of Finance. Yeah, looking through the public accounts, it states that the government received over $4.3 billion in revenue from the carbon tax. I'm just wondering if you guys can once again confirm if it's revenue neutral or not.
Mr. Chair, as I think is well known, it is an act of Parliament that those payments have to be, it has to be in balance and it has to be revenue neutral.
Okay, and then I'm just wondering, based on the figures here, how much of that $4.3 billion, or maybe it was above and beyond, how much did the GST that was collected on the carbon pricing, how much did that account for?
I don't have that number. Nick, do you have that number, or Eva, do you have that number? No. We'll have to get back to you on that.
So do you have any idea, though? Is it more than that, or would it be included within that number? It's kind of bizarre that it's not in here. It's a common question that we all get, is why is it applied on top and how much is it worth? Because nobody seems to know the answer to it. So if you can get that number, that would be fantastic, and table it with the committee. That would be very helpful. But do you have any inclination as to whether it's within that number or above and beyond?
Be over and above. Be over and above.
It'd be over and above? Okay. Thank you very much. I do have another kind of, it's a bit more of a regionalized issue. And actually, I think there's two of them really, but there's one in particular. I think when you look at the overall phase out, not just of coal, but of fossil fuels in general, and the impact that's going to have on the government's bottom line. I'm just wondering, as we go forward, what are the projections for revenues going to be like, given that one of the main drawers of income for the government is going to be systematically eliminated?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure I understand the question. I'm not trying to stall you here. I'm just
no. That's fair. But there's money brought in based on as revenues from the energy sector, from the oil and gas industry. And those revenues will not be replaced with alternative energy sources. So what is the impact that this decision is going to have on the financials of the country going forward when you look at the projections?
Well, I think you're talking, Mr. Chair, I think the member is talking about a period of time that is beyond the period of time where we would make projections. I'll back up and provide the following answer. Obviously, we're living in a period right now with energy prices being what they are, where those inflows of revenues are substantially increasing our revenues and also the revenues of a number of provinces. Over time, as the world evolves toward a net zero world, which obviously that's a world headed toward 2050. So there's a substantial period of time between now and then. What are we doing about it? In terms of your question about revenues, my answer to that is, over time, as fossil fuels wind down, one of the challenges that Canada has is to develop alternative engines of growth. I'll give you some numbers. Fossil fuels used to be about 34% of business investment in Canada. Today, recently, it's been about 10 or 11. That has to be replaced by the building of new engines of growth. And from those engines of growth, there will be revenues. So we don't regard the trend toward net zero as something that is necessarily a threat to the revenue stability of the federal government. What the challenge is building the alternatives that will drive growth and prosperity in Canada as we do evolve to a net zero economy.
Okay, thank you for that. And then just in my last minute here, more locally, there is, my riding and the riding next door to me in Saskatchewan is going to be two of the ridings most hardest hit by the phase out of coal, and I understand that it's both provincial, federal, but there is a line item, not so much in the public accounts, but in budgets, or it's been talked about a lot about the coal transition fund. And I'm hearing from the municipalities who will be affected, there's nothing coming their way. I'm just wondering, do you have any comments? Is there anything that you're aware of that will be done to support those communities who are hard hit by that, and why is there not a line item in the public accounts for that?
There's no line item in the public accounts because what the member is pointing to is something that is prospective and in the future as opposed to retrospective, and the public accounts by their nature are retrospective. However, there certainly is a substantial amount of work underway within the government and was actually referenced in the recently tabled budget with respect to the work, in particular, that the Minister of Natural Resources is going to be doing, along with some of his colleagues,
Thank you, and I'm going to have to cut it right there. I appreciate that was a pretty good answer, and we can come back to that in our fourth round. Finishing up this round, though, I have Ms. Shanahan. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Mr. Sabia, for those interesting reflections. So I just want to clarify something, because the intent of our pollution pricing system is to be revenue neutral. Do the public accounts show that the revenues from carbon pricing are returned to their, or were returned to their jurisdiction of origin?
So 2 answers. By and large, yes, they do. There are some timing differences in how things are reported and how they are reflected in the public accounts. So the public accounts treat this issue. It's based on the accounting structure. Is that it's based on the period in which revenues are received and expenses are incurred. So when they are assessed or when they are dispersed. Because of that, that does lead to, as I say, some timing differences. Those timing differences will resolve themselves over time. For the year 22-23, they should disappear, given that we will be providing climate action incentive payments on a quarterly basis, which will resolve some of these timing differences. The second thing that will, over time, resolve itself, and in, I think, the very near term, as you know, the vast bulk of those payments are made, and that gets you very close to the issue of revenue neutral. There are some payments to be made to small and medium businesses, to farmers, and to Indigenous Canadians. They are in the works. They need to be done. And as those payments are made and we resolve these timing differences, then members of Parliament will see that this is operating on a purely revenue neutral basis.
Well, thank you for that answer. Timing is everything, as they say. I just want to move toward the question of interest rates, because I think there's more than one of us here that remembers when interest rates were 10, 12, 14, 16%. The OAG has stated that the total unmatured debt on the government statement of financial position rose from approximately $784 billion to $1.125 trillion in the 2021 fiscal year. The public debt charges related to unmatured debt decreased for the reasons that you mentioned earlier, because of the low cost of borrowing. But what are the department's projections for the coming years with regard to public debt charges related to unmatured debt?
Well, you can see those laid out not in the public accounts, but you can see them laid out in the budget, recently tabled budget, actually sitting in Annex 1 on page 226. It lays out all of that. So by way of short summary, we do see interest rates are expected to go up, and as you know, the basis of the projections that we use in the budget are based on a survey of private sector economists, and those private sector economists do assume that rates are going to go up. You will also see in the budget that we have stress tested that for moderately better circumstances or moderately worse circumstances where we see incremental increases in interest rates. And we've also laid out in the budget what the fiscal consequences of that would be. I would say that even in those stress cases where circumstances are leading to higher and more rapid increases in interest rates, we continue to be, the country continues to be in a very strong and a favorable position with respect to the overall, the percentage of expenses that are allocated to public debt charges. We continue to be in a strong position.
Excellent, thank you. Chair, how much time do I have?
1 minute.
1 minute. I'd like to switch gears here and ask about cybersecurity. So, is it Mr. Huppe for the Treasury Board? In the commentary from the OAG, the OAG notes that 5 organizations were subject to a cyber attack in 2021. Which organizations were targeted? What personal information was stolen, and what measures have been put in place to prevent cyber attacks?
Actually, the Auditor General did that audit, so they're probably in better position to divulge or not the organizations that they've been to, and what kind of observations that they made. Yeah.
Very good. Mrs. Hogan?
Mrs. Hogan, you're on mute.
Mr. Chair, thank you. We didn't list the names of the organizations in order to not further expose them to any risk or vulnerabilities, but 2 of them have been very public in the media. So the Canada Revenue Agency would be one, and Employment and Social Development Canada. So I think the knowledge of the personal information that might have been compromised is already out in the public domain on those 2 instances. In all the cases we outlined actually in our commentary that it had an impact either on lost information or systems being shut down, but they were all things that were overcome by the cyber policies and the cyber response for the entities, but they did have an impact on our audit. And so it is about maintaining that cyber awareness and being vigilant across the entire federal public service. That's important to remember here.
And thank you very much. That is the time. Going to our 4th and final round, turning to Mr. Lawrence, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, and I want to pick up on a couple lines of questioning from my colleagues. One is with respect to the climate action incentive payments and the neutrality of the carbon tax, or suppose it. So William Shakespeare once wrote, "Rose by any other name smells just as sweet." And when we look here, we see the 2020 proceeds used for federal programming as of March, this is on page 18, as of March 31st, 2021, was $98 million. To support federal programming, I think can be translated into spending. And $98 million represents more than tiny to me. Could Finance please comment on that?
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure what your question is.
So if the government's spending $98 million of that on spending $98 million, is that truly revenue neutral?
I think, yeah, you go ahead, Nick, because my answer is yeah, it does. But go ahead.
And thank you for the question, because I think it establishes some clarification. So it's the 2 elements, like the bulk of the revenues are repaid, for lack of a better term, through the climate action incentive payment, 90+%, and then the remainder, which is the 98 million that you're referencing, is through federal programming where you're trying to target either the not-for-profit sector, schools, hospitals, small, medium-sized.
Yeah, but would you agree with me that support for federal programming is the same as government spending?
Can't deny that it is delivered through a government program.
And so it is that $98 million is not returned, and so it is not revenue neutral. We can say bulk, we can use alternative botanic terms, and you'll apologize. When the government starts to leak, those leaks tend to get bigger in history. Like the Income Tax Act, it was only going to last for a temporary measure, right? So it starts with 98 million, and before that million turns to billion.
Well, Mr. Chair, I guess all I can say on that is I think we disagree on that point, and we disagree I'll just make 2 points. One, it is the law of the land that it has to be revenue neutral, and therefore it is handled in that way and is treated in that way. We certainly do not think about any income that we get as something that's comparable in any way to a tax revenue. It's not for us to spend it in different ways. It has to be returned.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry.
Real quick.
Okay.
And we do have a bit of work to do, and you're right on that. We do have a bit of work to do on small and medium businesses and others where we need to get some payments out that are not yet out, and when they are, then it will be completely revenue neutral.
Thank you. We'll agree to disagree. I think the $98 million means it's not revenue neutral, but we can agree to disagree. One final line of question for finance as well. The bringing in of the $10 billion from the tribunal into these returns, would that, by bringing in extra money and not pushing it out, that would in fact help the government's narrative that they are actually declining the amount, the GDP to debt ratio? Would it not, as opposed to if that money was realized later? Is that not correct?
Mr. Chair, my answer to that is no, not necessarily. That would depend on. I mean, it's very counterfactual. We're in the realm of the counterfactual here, but it would depend on how that money were profiled that's out over time. It wouldn't necessarily particularly change the slope of the line on, say, deficit to GDP or the deficit numbers themselves. That being said, from our perspective, and again, ultimately, the clean audit opinion speaks volumes about the validity of the decision that was made. But the point here is by booking those revenues when they were booked, we believe that the public accounts are a more accurate reflection.
I understand that, Mr. Sabia. My belief, though, is that if you have the $10 billion earlier in the timeline, as opposed to later, it creates an artificial decline in the amount of debt or deficit, as opposed to realizing it lately. If we have a higher number earlier, does that not mean that we'll have a lower number later? Like, it's only common sense there, with respect.
Well, again, I don't want to debate geometry
Just a quick answer, please. I want to cut things. Do you have a quick answer?
Well, what to say? If that money were distributed differently, I think you could probably configure a line with a very similar slope. So I'm not sure that the point that the member's making about how booking it in a particular period was helpful to an argument about declining deficits to GDP.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm just under the gun here, and I know you are as well. Turning now to Ms. Bradford, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please. Over to you.
Thank you. So shifting gears back to the Auditor General, could you describe the weaknesses with respect to the management and accounting of national defense inventory and asset pooled items? And do you believe they're on track to resolve these problems, and why?
So our concerns around national defense's management of its inventory and asset pooled items has been ongoing for many years, 18 years to be exact. The department submitted a detailed action plan, a 10-year action plan to try and address their concerns with inventory management back in 2016 to this committee. They are on track for the items in that plan. We do monitor it every year. However, there are some really significant items that are still yet to come. Implementation of a new system and some barcoding of inventory, which will help with inventory movement and management. Every year we do attend inventory counts. We do detailed testing of inventory, and we continue to see an error in at least one in every 4 items that we sample, either from a quantity perspective, a valuation perspective, or a classification perspective. So it is our belief that until the internal controls around inventory management, as well as the implementation of all the elements in the 10-year action plan are done, these errors are likely to continue, and hence we will continue to monitor it.
Okay, thank you. Turning back to the Department of Finance, 2020 had an unprecedented volatility in revenue due to the pandemic. Which revenue sources were the most stable and dependable in those extreme circumstances?
Well, thank you for the question. Indeed, it was an unprecedented year. The best kind of representation of our revenue streams are outlined on page 17. So, quite honestly, notwithstanding the fact that we had the largest economic shock since the Great Depression, our income tax streams held up pretty well. The economy bounced back pretty strong. The recovery path exceeded expectations. And so you can see in terms of income tax revenues across, principally personal and corporate income tax revenue streams held up over the course of the pandemic, or at least the 2021 fiscal year. Other revenue streams took a little bit more of a hit. As contact-sensitive sectors closed, our retail sector and associated GST revenues took a hit as well. Likewise, in terms of tradables and other elements that are subject to some of our excise taxes, those declined as well. That's kind of the basic narrative, but you can see the detail in the table that I outlined.
So one of the reasons that Public Accounts reports that the revenues decreased was due to the one-time GST credit payment. Do you think it's appropriate to classify this as lower revenue or as an expense?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Historically, our tax transfer programs that are refundable are categorized as a negative revenue. So speaking to the point that you were trying to make, I could ask the Auditor General to speak in terms of the accounting principles behind that, but traditionally our GST credit, which I believe is one of our largest refundable tax credits at the household level, has always been treated as a negative revenue.
Okay. And now turning to the Treasury Board, pensions for public servants represent a significant part of compensation costs. We know that there's a great struggle to attract and retain staff. Do you have any opinion as to what kind of a role that may play in attracting and retaining staff right now?
Sorry, you're making the link between the actual pension expenses and the capacity to attract staff?
Right.
I mean, as being a public servant, I'm not going to hide the fact that we kind of have a pretty nice pension package and benefits. So for certain, it could be a strong point in how we attract people. But again, I think that's basically, we tell you every year we have to revalue these pension expenses. And again, it is one of our major expenditures, as you could see, but definitely something that is considerable when you're employed in the federal public service for sure.
Are you struggling to attract and retain the staff that you need?
Well, I think, like I said, my colleague here at TBS would be in charge of all the strategies around retention and staffing as the chief human officer. But I would tell you, like any other business, and especially in different spheres of the industries and level of expertise that we need, we will struggle. As you know, the employment insurance numbers are very low, and people of all industries are trying to attract people. If I take a look at my own, I run the financial management community, and there are expertise out there. We don't have enough accountants, to be honest with you. So again, we're trying to find ways to attract the accountants coming out of the universities. But again, it is a challenge on many fronts.
Thank you very much. That is the time. On this one, turning now to la députée Sinclair Desgagnés.
Ms. Sinclair Desgagnés, you have the next question. I'll finish my question to Mr. Hubé. I'd like to have a legal opinion or an opinion from you about the best way to ask Crown corporations to provide this additional information about the headquarters and name of organization receiving public funds. Mr. Hubé? Well, we could send you the details and tell you what the process would be that would have to be undertaken to arrive at that. I imagine there are many different scenarios. It could go through Treasury Board or legislation. Thank you for that. When we look at the assets and liabilities of Crown corporations, we see that Crown corporations contribute about a third of the financial results for 2020-2021. So I think it's very important for society, for Quebecers and Canadians who want that kind of information to be able to get it. I'm looking at my colleagues. I think it's very important to have transparency and accountability so that citizens can have that kind of information. It would be our legacy to get this on behalf of public accounts. For the last minute I have, I'd like to take advantage of the presence of our witnesses here. I've been following you for a long time. I'm very pleased to have you here. You talked about different scenarios that you considered at the Department of Finance regarding the increase in interest rates, especially inflation forecasts for the coming months. Last week, I was at the Finance Committee with the Bank of Canada, and they're anticipating increases in inflation too. Did you take into account these forecasts? Okay, we will leave him time to answer, please. Well, your question, did you take into account the increase in inflation and reduction in revenue? An increase in inflation is not something that will necessarily reduce our revenue, not necessarily. So there will probably be an increase in inflation, and that it'll increase the nominal GDP, and that increases our revenue. But more generally, we're very well aware, and we did emphasize the question of uncertainty that results from the current economic forecast. There's a lot of uncertainty right now. The growth level in Canada, yes, there is an issue there. I have to stop you there. Thank you very much. I'm so sorry. Mr. Desjardins.
Very much, Mr. Chair. Now I would like to turn my last line of questioning to the Treasury Board representative related to my first line of questioning on the pay system and our Auditor General's suggestions since 2016 to improve this system and the many, many hundreds of thousands of pay requests that the government is currently sitting on and the employees who are suffering for it. My question is quite frank. What steps will the Treasury Board take in order to reduce the number of outstanding pay action requests? Maybe an example of how we've been able to take it down for just this last year from just 300,000 to 250 odd thousand. Still a ridiculous amount. But what steps are in place, and what confidence do Canadians have, particularly employees, that these will be successful?
So I will say that throughout the past few years, many steps have been taken. Our colleagues at Public Service Department who handles the compensation has obviously worked very hard diligently. They've hired more staff, more compensation advisors, better training, looked at redefining some of the business processes, but also making a lot of system modifications and changes and adjustments to try to eliminate or decrease the backlog. Like you said, there's still an enormous amount of backlog, but it has considerably decreased since if you go back to 2018. At the same time, we have our colleagues at Shared Services Canada that are working on developing what I would call a next generation pay system. We're going to be looking at doing some pilots with some key departments to be able to come with a new system and a new solution that will hopefully solve the issues.
Sorry, I just have limited time. During this new portion, will the Treasury Board consult with PSAC, for example, to avoid this problem? Just to rewind here, this is in the exact situation that Treasury Board got themselves into the first time when we introduced Phoenix Pay System. Not consulting with workers resulted in the direct impact to workers, and we're still trying to clean it up. And to be frank, I don't see those measures helping. This is still a huge amount, over 200,000 pay requests. It's not quick enough. You need to hire far more advisors, and I'd consider paying damages at this point. These are real concerns. Would TBS consider working with folks who actually are on the other end of these pay systems in order to get it right? Because my fear is we're going to have another pilot program that's going to increase these.
I'm going to let the witness respond because we're running out of time here. We might lose the connection.
Yeah, Shared Services Canada is the department that leads these efforts right now. And without knowing all of the details, I can assure you that there's a very large consultation process that's been ongoing and will continue. So I would step out and say absolutely every key stakeholder will be consulted through this.
Thank you. Thank you to all the witnesses, particularly those that had to do some rescheduling and those that agreed to stay a little longer than anticipated. Thank you very much for being here today. I'd like to remind members we'll be studying the main estimates in the department results report from the Office of the Auditor General on Thursday. I now adjourn this meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.